everyone. Hi. Welcome to Politics and Prose bookstore. My name is Chloe, and I'm one of the booksellers here at Politics and Prose, where we host in-person events along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. We've recently relocated both of our branch locations at Union Market and The Wharf, and we've started hosting events there as well. For a complete list of our confirmed events, please visit our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your phones so we don't disrupt the event tonight. Thank you. When we get to the time for opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a standing microphone at the end of the aisle to your right. It's hiding behind this pillar for some of you. Please line up behind the microphone and then speak clearly so that everyone can hear your question, both in person and on our audio recording of the event. We're both audio and video recording today's program, so you or anyone you know can soon find it on our YouTube channel. We will not have a signing line after the event tonight, but if you've not already purchased the book, we do have pre-signed copies available for purchase behind the register up at the front of the store. And once the event is complete, we'll ask you to please fold your chairs and then lean them up against something sturdy to help out our events team. And now I'm very excited to welcome Julia Alvarez, celebrating the release of her book, The Cemetery of Untold Stories. As the author of 6 novels, 3 books of nonfiction, 3 poetry collections, and 11 books for children and young adults, Julia Alvarez has made an indelible mark upon American and Hispanic literature. Her work has garnered wide recognition, including a Latina Leader Award in Literature from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the Hispanic Heritage Award in Literature, the F. Scott Fitzgerald Award, the Woman of the Year by Latina Magazine, and the National Medal of Arts awarded in 2013 by President Obama. Her novel, In the Time of the Butterflies, with more than 1 million copies in print, was selected by the National Endowment for the Arts for its National Big Read program, and it was also adapted into a feature film. Alvarez has taught and mentored writers in schools and communities across America, most recently as the writer-in-residence at Middlebury College. Tonight, Julia Alvarez will be joined in conversation with Maria Arana. Maria Arana is an author, journalist, editor, critic, and the inaugural literary director at the Library of Congress. Her books have garnered her a spot as a National Book Award finalist and numerous placements on the New York Times and Washington Post's top 10 books of the year lists. Her newest book, Latino Land, a portrait of America's largest and least understood minority, has been met with wide acclaim, and it's also available for purchase. And now, we are so grateful for the opportunity to host this incredible event tonight and to share in the celebration of Julia Alvarez's new book. Please join me in welcoming Julia Alvarez and Maria Arana to Politics and Prose.
Buenas tardes. ¿Qué tal? Wonderful to see all of you and welcome. Thank you for coming and turning out for this absolutely brilliant American novelist. I don't say Latina novelist, I say American novelist. She is part of the canon now, and I'm very, very proud of her. I'm very proud to say that I have known Julia for a very long time. I think we met Julia back with In the Time of the Butterflies. So that's almost 30 years that I've known you and appreciated your work and read everything that you've written, not only in my capacity as a critic. I was the books editor of the Washington Post, but also as a fellow writer. You know, you are such a model for the rest of us. So, and this book is absolutely stunning, absolutely brilliant. I think it is the grand sort of symphony of all your talents and all your skills. It's really a marvelous book. I want to congratulate you for it. Can we give her a huge hand for this book? Read it first. No, I promise you, you will be astonished by this book. It will take you places you've never been. It's really marvelous. Because we are the same generation, and because we were just saying, we both arrived in this country when we were 10 years old. I came from Peru, and of course Julia from the Dominican Republic, and we came at a time when the U.S. Census was only counting 2 million Latinos in this country, people who counted themselves Hispanics or Latinos, and now we are 64 million. I figured that a lot of them were not counting themselves at all as Latinos, because there was one point where Mexican Americans were told that they should mark white on their, so that they could vote, because otherwise they wouldn't have be able to vote. But at any rate, Julia, can we start by talking about that trajectory of the United States then as a writer, and you're looking back on it, and the United States now with this incredible community of Latinos who appreciate who you are, probably more than the ordinary reader.
Boy, that's going way back, 1960, landing in this country, feeling like we had gotten out of the Trujillo, can you all hear me? Out of the Trujillo dictatorship, out of the, más fuerte, out of the Trujillo dictatorship, that we had come here, but of course it was 1960. The civil rights movement was just getting started. You know, we turned on the TV, people were being hosed down, dark-skinned people, and I remember thinking the police were after them with dogs, and I remember thinking, wait a minute, is this not a dictatorship too? I remember being scared. And of course, you know, having to leave everything behind as a young kid and trying to struggle to learn the culture and feel like I belonged. And back then there was no such thing as bilingual education or multicultural studies. So, you know, when we went to Catholic school, the nuns would scold us, my sisters and me, because we would be speaking in Spanish. So there wasn't even a vocabulary to understand who we were. And there weren't any books out there that we could read about people like us. So there was this blank that you had entered. But one of the things that I discovered is that I didn't land in a country that was the home of the brave and the land of the free, but I had some wonderful teachers that got me started reading. And the real grand democracy that I discovered was between the covers of books. You could be anybody there. You became the other. And that for me became how I found my way as a person in this country. That was my green card, becoming a reader, because I was not a reader before then. I did have one auntie who is here tonight who gave me the one book that I can remember reading, The Arabian Nights, and it was a beautiful book to get as a kid, because I was not a reader. I was flunking every grade, and here was this book about a young girl who told stories and saved the people in her kingdom by telling stories, and saved her own life. And I thought, that's who I want to be. I want to be like that. Stories have power. And so it's special to have her here tonight.
Very special. Very special.
And she hates attention, so she will not forgive me.
And I have to say that you've resurrected the Arabian Nights in this book.
Oh, yeah.
Totally, because there is a very strong echo of Scheherazade in this book. Now, but you describe a United States that was really a blank slate, not very welcoming to a Dominican child. But I want you to fast forward and tell me how it was as an aspiring writer into that, because it was a bit of a void right up until the 1980s.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when Garcia Girls, my first novel, was published in 1991, I had already been writing since high school because I became passionate. This is what I wanted to be, a writer, a writer. And, you know, I went to college, I went to an MFA program, and, um, and I was writing, and I would send my stories out, my poems out, and mostly there wasn't a market for them because they weren't for the mainstream readership. You know, they were sociology. They were not, you know, they weren't publishing stories like that. And I think the person that for me and many writers, Sandra Cisneros has also talked about her, is Maxine Hong Kingston. She came out with A Woman Warrior, I think in 1976 or 77. And it was an amazing book because it was celebrated, it was on bestseller lists, and it was a story of a Chinese American family in California. And I thought, this could be my family, you know, how they operated. And so it just, it that's what I mean. She gave us the vocabulary. She was, it's not that books can't be written by anybody and you can love them no matter whether you're the same race or ethnicity, but to see that someone can make literature out of experience that you've been told is just sociology was eye-opening and a real release for me and many young writers coming up then. So that came out in the late 70s, and you know, it was a while still, but I credit her with starting.
I do too.
And
I do
a
too.
real
In fact, I feel the same way. When I read Warrior Woman, it was like, oh, you can do this.
Yes, yes.
You can do this. You
Yes.
can live in a magical world in your head, and I felt the absolute echo of my own life and the way that we were raised, which was, you know, with a kind of magic as part of your life. The whole business of being, I think the South American mind, the Latin American mind, the Caribbean mind, tends to the magical imagination. So it really resonated with me.
Well, I think they call it magical here, but it's just that it's attuned to other realities.
Absolutely,
And
and I really
accepting-
don't.
yeah.
Thank you for correcting me because I
Yeah.
don't like the word magical, and I was hesitating even as I was using it.
Right. I remember when I gave Papi Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude, and I said, Papi, you know, sort of showing off because, you know, I'd gone to college now and I knew terms like magical realism. I said, Papi, this is an example of magical realism, and it's a great novel, and you should read it. And he loved it. He said, well, why do they call it magical realism? This is just the way we are.
Where we live, right? Right.
You know, it's just a different, but we
Yes.
brand it because, you know, we have to have handles on what's others so that we don't feel overwhelmed by it. But yeah, it's another way of understanding reality. But to live in that mixture of one reality that says one thing, you know, and another reality that says another thing. I remember when we were taking the SATs, that mommy had someone come to the house and exorcise the house because she wanted good spirits because we were all misbehaving, and yet we had to go take SAT courses so that we could get, you know, a good score. So there was that. Wait a minute, is it the azabache in my bra, or is it the class with the SAT? What's going to get me into college here, you know? And then you do both, you know, you do both.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know what you describe about the sort of paucity of literature that could reflect anything that you knew. It was something that I felt starting in publishing because the beginning of my career.
There's some truth to the fact that in our native cultures, that there were oral cultures. And I often say that everything that I went on to learn in my MFA program about timing and character and humor and pacing in writing, sometimes I had learned those same things in childhood from people that didn't, many of them, even know how to read or write. You know,
Right.
las niñeras, the nannies that were there that would tell you stories about la ciguapa, el cuco, whatever, and they knew how to tell the story. And
Best
I mean,
stories,
yeah, and so those things were there. But, you know, now the stories, now what I feel like, and part of what the novel acknowledges is that many of the stories come from there, but I write, I enter them into another reality by putting them in writing. But that same sense of storytelling, it's a rich cultural influence. And in the South here, in this country too, they have that oral storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very deep cultural thread that runs through our lives. But I want you to talk about the way stories exist in this book, because this is a remarkable book, and I'm still threshing it because I just finished it on purpose because I was going to talk to you today. I held off reading it until I just finished it yesterday, so it's very fresh in my mind. And I have to say that I feel what you're doing in this book, and you can tell me I'm way off or whatever, but for me, this is the most unbelievably, deeply moving sort of gathering of a literary mind like yours, focusing on the importance, the depth, the actual, the living thing that is storytelling. The what a story does to not only to the person who produces it, but to the people who are living it. And most of all, that business, that characters very often take off on their own, which is very much alive in this book. They're in many ways out of your control, even as a writer.
Right.
They do their own things.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
True.
So how did that? Because I see this as a real sort of, shall we say, tribute to the art of storytelling in itself.
Yeah, and a cautionary tribute.
Yes.
In that, as I mentioned with the first bookend of Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights, stories have power, and therefore they can be used and misused.
Yes.
You know, you can use a story to divide people, to create an us and them, to do all kinds of machinations. And so to be a responsible storyteller, you know, and to recognize that when you're telling a story, it's got a power and it's not about you. You know, in this culture, we have such celebrity making of the writer, and it's an acknowledgement in a way. Alma, the storyteller, is an old woman in the book, and she has come to the end of her writing life. She no longer has the animo or the energy, but the stories are still inside her. They haunt her. And she realizes she's never going to write them down or finish them, the ones she got stuck in. And so therefore, she has to lay them to rest. And what better place than to take them back to where they came from, the homeland, and create a cemetery for those untold stories and bury those manuscripts. But they have a life of their own, and they refuse to stay silenced. But part of it is an acknowledgement that the stories have this kind of power, and that you have to be a Filomena. There's a character in the book, and the writer Alma hires her, and all she has to, well, she grooms the grounds, but she finishes quickly because there's not much to do. She says, what else should I do? And so Alma says, well, if you would sit by each sculpted tomb, because Alma has an artist friend that creates a little sculpture for each of the failed manuscripts, sit beside each one and just listen. And boy, does she listen. And the stories come up and tell their stories to her. So part of it is, as a writer, the acknowledgement that one of the best things you can do, you have to develop your craft. That's your job, to develop the craft of writing. But that doesn't mean you can write a book. Then you have to be a deep listener to the story and the characters. And they will take you all kinds of twists and turns and give you a hell of a time and a hell of a ride, but you stick with them and you try. It's a funny balance. You try to stay out of the way, but then you're the craftsperson, so you're also somewhat driving the car. So it's a tricky thing. So yeah, an acknowledgement of the power of stories, and also as you get towards the end of your life and your writing life, and you think, oh, all those stories I'll never get to tell, but it's okay, because après moi, it won't be le silence. There's so many. Look around you. Look at all the storytellers that are on these shelves, and they will keep coming. And it's wonderful because it means that it's not a one person. And when in our celebrity culture, you feel like it's, you're it.
Right.
No, you're not it.
Yeah.
You're a servant of the story, for heaven's sakes. It's like politics. You're not the one in power. You're the servant of the people. That's what we do when we are passionate about a craft.
And sometimes you are such a servant of your characters that they abandon you. And so this is to me the remarkable thing about this book, because they abandon Alma, but they have another life in the cemetery, a life that they contrive for themselves, and sometimes those lives cross, and the narratives cross. And this is probably something that happens in a writer's head, because once you think of stories that you might write, eventually they probably meet each other somewhere, because they're all a part of who you are.
It's sounding really complicated. It's really easy. It's an easy read.
Because it's a mesmerizing read.
Because the novel starts by the caption, "Tell me a story." And the only way to get into the Cemetery of Untold Stories is there's an intercom at the gate. You press it, and a soft voice says, "Cuéntame, tell me a story." And if you tell a good story, it lets you in. And if not, you can't get in. So part of it is, you also have to know as a writer, as a storyteller, where have you found the deep root, And sometimes they abandon you because you're getting in the way. You're not really listening, like Filomena can, this character, to the story and the storyteller. You have your own preconceptions, or you're already, judging it, but to really listen, and not just to the characters, but to the story.
Yeah. And it doesn't, and Filomena is illiterate, so this is not about necessarily reading, it's about the story itself, the life of a story itself.
But she's the only one that gets into the cemetery every time, because even though she's illiterate and she hardly talks, so they think of her as la bruta in the barrio, she's filled with stories. And in that little intercom and in the cemetery, she connects with stories, her story.
Now, Julia, as I was reading this, I felt so much resonance with your own life. And I could recognize the Papi the doctor. I could recognize certain aspects of just little glimmers of your life that were represented in this story. Could you, to what extent? I mean, this is a question that you're going to be asked again and again and again. But to what extent are you using your own life in this book?
You and I know probably this wonderful, and many of you out there, this wonderful little essay, Borges and I, the two Borges, right? I really am not very interested in Julia Alvarez when I'm writing. but she is my eyes and my ears and my person in the world. And she's the one that can bring me the materials as a writer. And I'm not interested in the tyranny of what really happened when I'm writing. I'm not writing, to tell the fake or not fake fact. I'm interested in what the story needs. And if it needs my, where else do I gather material but through this little body that I've been given? So that's what I use. But I weave it, and sometimes I myself don't even know what's made up and what's real.
Right.
That's when I call my auntie and I say, well, not exactly. But the papi in this book, as I say in the acknowledgments, is not my father. This was not his story, but enough of the story of being an immigrant during the dictatorship is there. And, that experience, I can see the unwinding of one to the other might be a tricky matter. I can't do it.
There's a wonderful character in this book who is the ex-wife of the terrible dictator Trujillo. And she's a person about which we know not very much because her life was erased, really, from history books. If you look her up, you don't find much. What you find is the constructed story about her. What inspired you to write about her? Or to make her a character in your book, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Well, she is a historical. Some of the characters are fiction, totally fiction. But Bienvenida Inocencia, and that was her name. Imagine naming your kid Welcome Innocence. and so Welcome Innocence, who was supposed to be the sweetest, kindest, good woman, ends up marrying the devil himself. Welcome Innocence, right? But she was the second wife of Trujillo. He had married as a young man, somehow got that annulled. Catholic Church gave him a dispensation. It was some treaty made with the Vatican. And then he marries Bienvenida and ends up discarding her for his mistress and marrying the mistress, at which point Bienvenida was banished from all, her name was in streets, on schools, and she had all of that erased, the third wife. And Bienvenida was banished and lived in exile, a pretty sad, tragic life, wandering. And so I thought, I've always been interested in her because she's not the Mirabal sisters. She's not in the Time of the Butterflies. She wasn't a heroine, a politicized woman, but she was a romantic casualty of the dictatorship. And I'm interested in her life because she was a blank, and she wanted to remain that way. She just disappeared. And but I'm really interested in, I was very interested in what was her life story. What was it like?
Well, you gave her a story.
She gave it herself. She rises up she's in the cemetery. Yeah.
Would you like to read something to the audience to give them a taste of the book?
It's hard to hold. I'll have to. I've told you sort of. You'll know what this is because I already introduced the cemetery. That the people in the barrio, it's built. The cemetery is a little piece of inherited land that Alma, aka Scheherazade, that's her pen name. She's always written under Scheherazade, not for any literary reasons, but because she had a mommy that was furious at her writing, and so a friend suggested, well, get a pen name, so she got the pen name Scheherazade. And Alma brings all these manuscripts and everything to bury at this place that she's starting, and the surrounding barrio that is right next to the town dump. Very curious what's going on. The walls are going up. What are they building there? A free zone, a resort, an estate? What's going on? A wall goes up with these fanciful sculptures. Everybody's really curious. So they find out that it's going to be a cemetery, they're very upset. People are already dumping their trash in the barrio, and now they're going to dump their corpses there. They're very unhappy. But the foreman says, no, 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 it's not going to be a cemetery for people. And they say, para mascotas, entonces? Those who work as maids and gardeners know firsthand how attached the rich are to their pets. When their little dogs die, the owners mourn them more than they do other people's children. But generally, these pets are buried on the grounds of their owners' estates. The foreman shakes his head. No, the cemetery is not for pets either. But if not for people and not for pets, who is it for? This is as much as the foreman has been told. All he knows is that he has never felt happier in a job. For the first time since he became a foreman, he pitches in, working the backhoe, removing stones alongside his Haitian crew. He leaves the job refreshed, no need to stop on the way home at the barra or colmado and pick up a bottle of ron and drown himself in forgetfulness, ignoring his mujer and swatting at his kids if they make too much noise. Instead, he converses openly with his wife and children, remembering things he has forgotten. Amorcito, his wife teases, did you eat parrot for your almuerzo today? The owner stops by to review the progress of her project, a skinny woman with a lined face, graying hair, and an unpronounceable name that sounds like Che Guevara. Doña, he addresses her by way of avoiding it. No, Doña, just call me Alma, la Doña says, shaking his hand like a man. She is accompanied by a small, energetic woman with the easier name of Brava, about the same age but half the size of the other. One would think she is a dwarf, but all her body parts are in the right proportions, except for her large workman hands. She talks a mile a minute. The locals continue to pester him, so the foreman decides to go ahead, phrasing his question as a community request. The people in the barrio would like to know who the cemetery will be for, if not for people or pets or toxic materials. The owner laughs, a bright, sharp sound which ignites the small one's laughter. Perdón, she apologizes. I don't mean to be secretive, just that people never understand when I tell them. It's going to be a cemetery for stories. The foreman shakes his head, the way he does at the beach to get water out of his ears. Cuentos, he repeats. The women laugh again. Yes, he has heard correctly. Interesting, the man says, so as not to appear ignorant. Next time someone asks, he says, the cemetery is for los locos, the crazed, the deranged. But wait, aren't locos people too? I'm just the foreman, he shrugs. A sign goes up on the wall at the main gate. Cementerio de Cuentos Nunca Contados, a cemetery for untold stories. The only way to enter is to speak in a small black box at the front gate. Cuéntame, a woman's soft voice requests. Tell me a story. Only then does the door open or not. So.
Wonderful. And that's how it begins. So I want to, one of the book's great, I think, shining contexts is the business of sisterhood, siblinghood, sisterhood. And that seems to be a kind of connective that runs through so many of your stories and so many of your books. Could you talk a little bit about that, about the business of being a sister and being living in a family unit and having the stories be so different within the family unit?
Right. And, you know, we always hear about our macho, patriarchal cultures, and that was the surrounding envelope for certain. But I grew up in a matriarchal family. The men all left, and it was the women. It was just women and storytellers galore. You know, there was always stories at the table, repeated, and each time repeated and flavored a little different. So that community of women storytelling as as a kind of powerful bond is really something that runs, you're right, the Mirabar sisters, and they were their support system. For myself personally, coming to this country when there wasn't very much of a Latino context for us, my sisters were my community. It's people that had that same but not same combination, even within a family, how much one emphasizes one thing or another, endless arguments about what really happened. And when my book came out, they said, but why did you lie? I said, because it's fiction. I never wore that dress. But I lifted it from another cousin and put it on this sister, and boy, so or that didn't really happen. And so that also happens, and it keeps you sharp as a storyteller. You have to find your way through that labyrinth of wounded egos and possible problems and still tell a good story. But for me, the sister, the strength of that, I mean, Scheherazade became Scheherazade because of a woman's community. Right. She didn't go into the Sultan's bedroom alone. She brought her sister along. And they had this little thing worked up where the sister says to Scheherazade, Scheherazade, the night is long. Why not tell us one of your wonderful stories? And so the Sultan says, yes, go ahead. So it's there. She doesn't get as much credit, the sister, but she was a real instigator and she set it up. So yeah, sisterhood is important to me, and I think it's, deep rooted.
Oh, absolutely.
In my family and in my culture. Yeah.
I think in an immigrant context, it's your world.
Right.
Particularly when we did,
yeah.
when there was no world like your community,
right.
except within your house and within your
and the stories that you brought with you are your culture and your legacy. It's how you keep it alive, that and your food. Yeah. But that's important. Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in and in this, it's not just Alma's sisters, but Filomena has a sister.
Yes.
And there's a connection there too.
It's a world of sisters.
World really. Of sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to lead up to your questions, the audience questions, in a few minutes. But let me ask this one more question, if I may. This book, I see it as an homage to old age. It really is a beautiful homage to someone who has had a career, who has lived a life, who has produced works, and who now is wrapping things up in a way, and putting things away, sort of organizing the work that has been done or has never been finished. So it seems to me it's a beautiful homage to old age. Could you comment on that?
Well, when I wrote How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, my first novel, I was very much writing to a silence on the bookshelf, that there weren't books. I had started reading books by writers who were immigrant and male, but I didn't know any books, or I hadn't had access to them, about the female experience of immigration. So in a sense, I wasn't writing to be to sort of plant that flag. I was writing to understand who we were. Yeah. I was writing because I read books to understand myself and my reality. And when that wasn't there, I had to make it up, the book. And so I've always been interested in the lacunae, the places where there is a silence, there isn't. There, you want to understand. And as I age, more and more, I want stories about older protagonists, not the abuelita who's in the background being wise, because who's wise when they're old? Come on. We are wise somewhat, but we're complex like everybody else. Or on the first page of a Victorian novel, the old person, usually an old man, is dying, and he dies on the first page, and then there's havoc about his will. But I was interested in the character, in a female character, with the added complication of a Latina and a writer, instead of a portrait of the artist as a young man, a portrait of the artist as an old woman, complicated by the fact that she's Latina and a transnational writer where stories came from somewhere else. So I wanted that story. And I think that as I age, and as many of my baby boomer generation ages, we're more interested. We're frustrated with the ageism in a lot of fiction, and we want to see complex stories about this experience of growing old, and in this case, growing old in a craft. And one last thing, I was reading an article and very interested that there was Canadian critic Constance Rock, who has come up with a term for this, because she's noticed that more and more novels are appearing about elders. And she calls it the Volendungsroman. The Bildungsroman is the novel of growing up, coming of age. The Volendungsroman is the novel of completion, of growing old. And so I guess this is I can't pronounce it, but it's my Volendungsroman. And I'm sorry, my husband, who comes from German ancestors, would know how to pronounce it well, and he's tried to teach me the Volendungsroman.
We'll have to translate it to Spanish.
Yeah. Well, how would we say?
Envieje something.
The novel of.
Sí.
I don't know, but the aging. The novel of aging.
O de terminar.
Sí.
Yeah.
Sí.
De completar. Ajá.
Con broche de oro. Well, some days it doesn't feel like a broche de oro. I heard Ruby Sales, the MLK African American activist that was active also with Martin Luther King. She was talking about aging. She said, it's all horrible. You know, my knees ache, my back aches, I can't see, my hearing's going. But where I sit on the porch, I have hindsight, foresight, and insight, and that's 360 degrees. So that's what we older writers can maybe bring to our books, right? That 360-degree vision.
I love that. I love that. Let's have your questions. Please come to the microphone, which is right here beside this pillar, the front pillar, and ask Julia your questions. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm an English teacher, and my students for years have loved Daughter of Invention, the excerpt from Garcia Girls that shows up in a lot of anthologies. And I wonder, with so many stories in this new book, if there's a particular character's story that if students are going to get an excerpt in an anthology, who would you want them to encounter?
Oh, boy. You know, my books have the distinction, many of them, of having been banned. So, I always think, well, I don't think there was anything harmful. What was harmful about that? So I hate to get the banners looking at this and already finding what's problematic. Oh, my goodness. What part of it would be? Well, you know, it would be wonderful to have them try to get into the Cemetery of Untold Stories. And by pressing the intercom will say to them, tell me a story. And let them tell a story to get them in. Maybe that excerpt that I read, I don't know. Or, yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, please.
My name is Jose Sanchez. I had the opportunity to meet you before early in the evening. I will not use the word doña. I just got it. Just imagine, I will respect if you respond my question or not. Just imagine that I have the power to take you back that moment that you have to leave your country, and then you have the opportunity to grab something that you could share with those new millennials that doesn't have any idea what is that experience that you have, that you share with us, what you will grab, and how we could remember for them to acknowledge that experience and reflect on their own life because they think that like on TikTok is life.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean? What I would have brought with me?
Brought with you to share with the new millennials
Well,
that makes sense for them to understand your experience and what you share through the books.
Yeah.
what I would bring?
Uh-huh.
Oh boy, I mean, I think what I brought were the stories in my head. Because, we each came with our little maletica, and I don't even remember what was in there. But, it was the stories that I don't remember bringing anything
Personal.
personal, physical that I could say was special, because I think it's funny because when you ask that question, well, you're asking really how to get students to know to put down the device
Yes.
and tell me a story, a living encounter.
Yes.
And that's tricky. And I myself don't know how to negotiate that world. I mean, this is why more and more I feel like the world is a world beyond me in many ways, because stories will never die. Yeah. They will just find new forms. And maybe, I can't judge, maybe TikTok, maybe those are new ways of telling stories, videos in YouTube. We are a critter that tells stories, period. We don't make silk with the worms. We don't make honey with the bears. We tell stories. So I think that will continue. But how we do it, what technology we use. But what is problematic is when all your material is coming from that device instead of from the living of the life that would use that technology to tell those stories. And sometimes it takes getting older to realize, oh, I wish I could go back and find what happened there. So I don't know what...
I think you just answered the question beautifully.
Thank you.
I think Jose, right?
Yes.
What I brought with me were you'll find them between the covers of books.
Thank you.
Another question? Yes, please.
It's more a comment than a question. I remember reading how the Garcia girls lost their accents, and it spoke to me as a voice of the diaspora. So I'm New Yorican. And I just remember the stories that my grandmother and her sisters would tell me about living on an island and then moving, and it was just so compelling. And obviously I'm the daughter of a boomer, and I really love the literature that you said that you did not plant your flag on the bookshelf, and I want to say I disagree. Yeah, I think you really did. Not only for the diaspora, but also for us women, the experience, like you said, something about, the women stayed and the men left. It's like, yeah, I know that firsthand. Yeah. So I want to say that, yes, I think you put that flag on the shelf. And if I had a question, I think it would be, are there any authors, men or women, or any groups that you feel they have already put the flag out there and I just haven't heard about them, or something that excites you with that immigrant experience and, bringing the stories and then growing up here and becoming the person that you are? I feel sometimes that I have my feet on two different countries, I'm just standing, trying to straddle both cultures and lives. So thanks.
Well, there's so many wonderful writers from all around the world now that are diaspora writers. They've come here, but they bring it's not just the stories, they bring a different syntax and rhythm into English. They change the way, when I read Maxine Hong Kingston, or when I read, Adichie, I hear English in a different way. I'm now reading Monique Rofi. She's British Trinidadian writer. And I mean, I just hear that language in a different way. And I go around hearing it in my head. So it's also what we bring, in terms of at the cellular level of the language and the syntax, and then the stories, the amazing stories. I mean, when you ask for specific names, they all fly through my head. Welcome to
They're
aging. Yeah, but there's so many wonderful storytellers, and I'm reading more. I'm more and more interested in reading outside of the United States now, and mostly, lamentablemente, because of my wonderful nuns that used to scold me for speaking Spanish. I'm orally fluent. I mean, I understand, but I can't really read easily or write in Spanish. So, but there's some amazing translations coming out now. There is a wonderful writer. I'm on a huge kick. Claudia Piñero.
Yes.
Elena Knows. Read that novel. Talk about a novel about an older character. This old woman who has, is it Parkinson's?
Yeah.
And she's trying to get to the other side of town to get some information on who murdered her daughter. But you are in that body,
Yeah.
and in that language. And she's amazing. She's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Who knew, right? Monique Rofi, I just discovered her. I mean, I didn't know about her at all. So there are these wonderful writers from the Dominican Republic. Pedro Cavilla. Anybody know Rainbow? It just got translated into English by Jessica Powell. It is an amazing, amazing novel. It was given to me by my cousin, Juan Tomas, in Spanish several years back. And I said, well, when I have time to read it in Spanish, and it just came out in English. And I'm now reading it in Spanish because I know enough about the Pedro Cavilla, wonderful, wonderful novel. And he's written a bunch of novels, but I didn't know about him. So I came to discover he's Puerto Riqueño, but he lives in the DR because he married a Dominicana. We pull our men back. Yeah, and so he writes and lives in the Dominican Republic, but it's a beautiful book about the 1965 revolution, but it's a fiction. Yeah.
So here I want to say something on behalf of the publishers today, which are very different from the publishers back in the late 80s, early 90s, where it was really hard to get published if you were an immigrant writer. The world has changed. Now there is a proliferation of wonderful, as you say, wonderful writers from everywhere, from Asia, from Africa, from the Caribbean, and it's really so so wonderful as the two of us who came during a time when there was this very minor Latin American boom with all male writers.
Yep.
Cortázar and Vargas Llosa and Garcia Marquez, etc. And they were all from abroad, and that was seen as sort of an exotic thing to be reading. But the people here were being ignored. The immigrants here were being, this is a complete change. Now there is a very strong interest. And as you say, there's it's a candy store of choices.
Wonderful, yeah.
Yes, please.
Hi. So I hope my nerves don't betray me because I have to say that you are literally one of my favorite authors, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I have a comment and a question. I have to say I was born to Dominican parents in New York before I moved here to Northern Virginia. And I think that my foray, so to speak, into Latin American literature was in high school. I went to Brooklyn Tech, and we're very privileged that they exposed us to so many different things, like Isabel Allende, Pablo Neruda. And then here come you. When I started reading your books as a young adult, I felt like you were telling the stories from a perspective that my grandparents were too scared to tell. I mean, even traveling back there to the island, it's things that just sort of go unspoken. Like it's there, but you don't quite know the details about it. So I just wanted to say thank you because you opened up my eyes and allowed me to see like my culture in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And my question It might seem like a very simple-minded question, but what was your most difficult book to write? And if you feel comfortable sharing how you got through any obstacle.
Well, thank you for that question. And yeah, I think every book is, even though it's your passion, the writing it's hard to write. It's difficult. It has a lot of, you have to, each book, no matter if you wrote a wonderful last book, each book doesn't care about your credentials, doesn't care about your awards, doesn't care how many copies you sold. You have to learn to write that book again. So it's always beginner's mind. So it's never, that's why I made the point about if I thought I was writing a book that I was planting a flag, I would be terrified. I have to surrender, entregarme, give myself to the story, and forget about that. And the difficulty is overcoming your little tricks, your censors. Among the first row of censors, your mommy, your dad, your sister saying, "I'm going to kill you if you write that down." All of that, you have to forget all of that and surrender to the story. That's a given. But I think the first one, I've been writing those stories that became Garcia Girls for so many years. I think the difficulty there was finding a publisher because of the situation that Marie was just talking about. And the other thing is, I thought I would make my parents so proud, because by that time, a 41-year-old with no steady job, no husband, no prospects, who called herself a poet and a writer, ay Dios mío, they didn't want to die and not see me settled. And so I'm so proud that Garcia Girls got published, and I've done good, and I've proven that we belong in this country. And oh boy, the flack I got. Oh my God. I didn't expect it. So I think that was a hard thing to overcome to write the next book. And what helped me is to find, you don't need a whole lot of support. You just need to have your little cup. And along the way, you'll find little sips. People will pour little and little. And I found support along the way from other Latina writers. And I later would joke that the first line of Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior, could be the first line of any Latina of my generation, any Latina's novel. And it starts, The Woman Warrior, "My mother told me never, ever to repeat this story." And then she tells you. And I think that's the invisible first sentence of every book. Mommy told me never to say this.
Yeah.
And yet they gave you so much material, right? They gave you so much material. But it's entre familia, entre familia, very close. And writing In the Time of the Butterflies helped me to understand my mother and her generation. They grew up in a dictatorship where to let the story out, there wasn't the luxury of expressing yourself, and you had a right to that. That could be death to you, to your family, to people who knew you. So they live with that terrified, censored. The dictatorship gets in here. It's not just out there. And so with a Mirabal story, I understood what they had lived through that had given them that terror and fear. And then that thing in our culture, ¿qué van a decir?
Right.
What will they say? Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. No.
Hi, Hello? Okay. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming. I know if you could help the staff out and fold up your chairs and place them against something sturdy, that would be great. We are unfortunately not doing a signing line tonight, but if you're interested in purchasing a signed copy of the book, we have them available at the register. Thank you so much for coming.